In the blizzard of the century, she was pronounced dead. Her husband was lost to despair, but one soul refused to accept it. His dog fought against the world itself, clawing at the door until his paws bled. Was it simply a loyal animal's grief? Or did it know a truth that everyone else had missed? To find out if one dog's faith could overcome death itself, subscribe and witness this incredible story. The silence of the Montana mountains was a language Arthur understood better than words. It spoke in the whisper of wind through lodgepole pines and the distant crack of a frozen branch. For 40 years, first as a park ranger and now in his quiet retirement, this silence had been his most constant companion. His cabin, nestled in a valley not far from the jagged teeth of Glacier National Park, was a small bastion of warmth against a vast, indifferent wilderness. At 72, Arthur was as weathered as the landscape. His face was a testament to a life lived outdoors, etched with deep lines from sun and squinting, and his pale blue eyes, though faded, still held a ranger's keen awareness. He moved with the slow, deliberate economy of a man who knows his own limits, his tall frame now stooped by the gravity of his years. One February afternoon, with the sky the color of dull pewter and threatening more snow, Arthur was checking the southern perimeter of his property. The air was sharp enough to sting the lungs, and each crunch of his boots on the old snow was a sound swallowed by the immense quiet. He wasn't looking for anything in particular, just walking the familiar paths, his mind tracing memories as old as the trees around him. That's when he heard it. A sound so faint and thin it was almost lost in the wind, a desperate whimper that did not belong to any wild creature he knew. He stopped, head cocked, listening. There it was again, weaker this time. Leaving the path, he pushed through low-hanging, snow-laden boughs, following the pathetic sound. In the hollow of a snowdrift, almost completely buried, was a small, shivering bundle of fur. It was a puppy, no more than 8 weeks old, its black and tan coat matted with ice. It looked up at him with eyes that were barely open, a tiny spark of life drowning in a sea of cold. There were no tracks nearby, no sign of a mother or siblings, just this one small creature, abandoned to the killing frost. A feeling Arthur hadn't felt in years, a sharp ache of protective instinct, pierced through his stoicism. He gently brushed the snow away, his large, calloused hands surprisingly tender as he lifted the freezing animal. It was light as a feather, its body trembling violently. Without a second thought, Arthur unzipped his thick parka and tucked the puppy inside against his flannel shirt, sharing his body heat as he turned and hurried back toward the cabin. Inside, the warmth of the stone fireplace enveloped them. Arthur carefully placed the puppy on a soft wool blanket near the hearth. He worked quickly, warming a small bowl of venison broth, his movements sure and practiced. He dipped his finger into the broth and brought it to the puppy's lips. The tiny creature feebly licked the nourishment, its first act of trust. For hours, Arthur sat there, tending to the small life, watching the shivers subside and the breathing deepen. As the puppy finally drifted into a stable sleep, warmed and fed, Arthur looked at the magnificent, formidable landscape outside his window. He decided on a name, Kodiak. A name of strength, for a creature that had fought so hard for its small life. The weeks that followed melted into a new routine. Kodiak grew, his clumsy puppy legs gaining strength and his ribs filling out. He was a purebred German shepherd, intelligent and quick to learn. Arthur didn't train him with harsh commands, but with quiet gestures and a consistent presence. Kodiak learned to sit by watching Arthur tap the floor, to stay by the simple raise of a hand. He learned the boundaries of the property, the scent of deer and the danger of bears, not from a leash, but by following at Arthur's heels on their daily patrols. They became a unit, the old man and the young dog. Their bond was forged not in words, but in shared experience. They tracked a wounded elk through a snowstorm, Kodiak's keen nose leading the way. They sat together on the porch during the long summer evenings, watching the sun bleed color into the western sky. Kodiak was no longer just a dog Arthur had saved. He was a part of the old man's soul. When Arthur's arthritis flared on cold mornings, Kodiak would press against him, a living furnace of warmth and comfort. When a rattlesnake coiled on the path one day, it was Kodiak's sudden, ferocious bark that saved Arthur from a venomous strike. The dog had become his ears, his protector, a vigilant guardian against the slow creep of age and the ever-present dangers of the wild. He was a companion in the cold, a loyal heart beating in rhythm with his own, filling the profound silence with a meaning words could never capture. 5 years passed, each one etching deeper lines onto Arthur's face and adding a steadying maturity to Kodiak's powerful frame. The dog was now in his prime, a magnificent German shepherd whose devotion was the central pillar of Arthur's world. But that pillar was beginning to feel the tremors of time. A dizzy spell while chopping wood one morning, followed by a stark warning from Dr. Evans in town, had delivered a verdict Arthur could no longer ignore. His body was failing him. The solitude he had once treasured was now a liability. The difficult decision was made, a quiet surrender to the inevitable. He had to leave the mountains. His first and only call was to his grandson, Liam. Liam arrived a week later, his wife Chloe beside him, in their dusty Subaru. Liam was 28, with his grandfather's height but a leaner build. His dark hair perpetually looking like he'd just run his hands through it. He had a writer's thoughtful eyes, ones that seemed to be constantly observing and composing. He loved the cabin, holding on to childhood memories of summers spent learning to fish and track with Arthur. His wife, Chloe, was the picture of gentle city life transplanted into the wild. Her auburn hair was tied back neatly, and her kind green eyes scanned the imposing landscape with a mixture of awe and unconcealed anxiety. She was 5 months pregnant, and the soft curve of her belly was a promise of new life in this old place. They had been dreaming of escaping their cramped Bozeman apartment, and Arthur's news, though sad, presented an opportunity that felt like fate. For Liam, it was a creative sanctuary. For Chloe, it was a clean, quiet place to welcome their child. Kodiak stood beside Arthur as they pulled up, a silent, unmoving statue of black and tan fur. He was larger than Chloe had imagined, his head held high and his intelligent eyes missing nothing. He didn't bark or approach, merely watched, his entire being focused on Arthur. Chloe felt a tremor of fear. This wasn't a pet. This was a guardian, a piece of the wilderness itself, and his allegiance was clear. The handover was achingly practical. Arthur walked them through the cabin's quirks, the specific way to bank the fire at night, the loose floorboard by the kitchen sink, the spot on the porch where the snow always drifted highest. All the while, Kodiak shadowed him, a constant presence at his heel. When Liam tried to offer the dog a friendly pat, Kodiak simply shifted his weight, moving just out of reach without a sound, his gaze never leaving Arthur. The rejection was quiet, but absolute. The hardest part was the final goodbye. Arthur's old pickup truck was packed with a few boxes and a single suitcase. He knelt, his stiff joints protesting, and wrapped his arms around Kodiak's thick neck. He buried his face in the dog's ruff, and for a moment, the old ranger's composure cracked. "You be good, boy," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You watch over them." Kodiak whined, a low, guttural sound of pure grief, and licked the tears from Arthur's weathered cheek. As Arthur climbed into his truck, he looked at Liam. "He eats at sundown. He won't come if you just call him. You have to go out with the bowl. He's a good dog, Liam. The best." Then he was gone. The truck's red taillights shrinking down the long dirt road until they were swallowed by the trees. Liam and Chloe stood on the porch of their new home, the silence rushing in to fill the space Arthur had left. But it wasn't empty. Kodiak stood at the edge of the porch, staring down the road his master had taken, a rigid figure of loss. He didn't move for an hour. When he finally did, he walked past the new couple as if they were invisible, settling by the cold hearth, his back to them, his vigil of waiting just beginning. Chloe wrapped her arms around herself, a sudden chill running through her that had nothing to do with the mountain air. She wasn't just in a new house. She was an intruder in Kodiak's home, a stranger in the presence of a profound and broken heart. The first few months in the cabin were a study in quiet coexistence. Life settled into a rhythm dictated by the sun and the seasons. Liam found his writer's voice in the profound stillness, the clack of his keyboard, a small, rhythmic counterpoint to the sigh of the wind in the pines. Chloe, too, began to find her place. She planted a small herb garden in the sunniest spot by the porch and spent her afternoons reading, the majestic landscape her constant companion. They were building a life, piece by piece, in the house Arthur had left them. The only piece that wouldn't fit was Kodiak. He remained a figure of noble, heartbreaking grief. Liam tried everything. He offered the dog the choicest cuts of meat, spoke to him in the same low, gentle tones Arthur had used, and tossed sticks in the yard, hoping to ignite a spark of playfulness. The efforts were met with a consistent, dignified indifference. Kodiak would eat the food placed before him, but his eyes remained distant, perpetually fixed on the dirt road or the memory of a man who was no longer there. He was a presence in their home, but he was not a part of their family. He was Arthur's dog, waiting. The change began subtly, timed with the swelling of Chloe's belly. As she entered her third trimester, her movements became slower, more deliberate. An unconscious sigh as she lowered herself into a chair, a hand resting protectively on the vibrant life within her. Kodiak began to watch. His vigil for Arthur didn't cease, but it was now shared with a new subject of observation. When Chloe walked, his head would turn to follow her. When she hummed a soft tune to her unborn child, his ears would twitch, tuning into the sound. One afternoon, a large bull moose wandered out of the aspen grove, its massive antlers swaying as it ambled toward Chloe's herb garden. She froze on the porch, her heart leaping into her throat. Before Liam, absorbed in his work inside, could even notice, Kodiak moved. He rose from his spot in the sun and placed himself directly between Chloe and the intruder. He didn't bark or charge. He simply stood his ground, a low rumble vibrating in his chest, a clear and unmistakable message. The moose regarded him for a long moment, then changed its course, melting back into the trees. That night, for the first time, Kodiak did not settle by the cold hearth. When Liam and Chloe went to bed, they heard the soft click of his claws on the wooden floor, followed by the heavy sigh of him lying down. Liam opened the door a crack. Kodiak was there, sprawled on the floor right outside their bedroom, a self-appointed sentinel guarding the new life within. The moment that changed everything came with the first dusting of snow in late autumn. The light powder had melted and refrozen overnight, coating the porch steps in a treacherous, invisible layer of ice. Chloe, heading outside with a cup of tea, didn't see it. Her foot slipped, and with a small cry of shock, she tumbled sideways, landing hard on her hip in the soft, snowy yard. The fall wasn't serious, but the jolt and the sudden, fierce fear for her baby made her gasp. Before Liam could even push his chair back from his desk, Kodiak was a blur of motion. He launched himself from the porch, clearing the steps in a single bound. He was at her side in an instant, nudging her face with his cold, wet nose, his eyes wide with concern. Then, he turned toward the house and let out a volley of sharp, commanding barks. It wasn't the sound of aggression. It was an alarm, clear and urgent. Liam burst through the door, his face pale with panic. He helped a shaken but uninjured Chloe to her feet, his hands fluttering over her, checking for any harm. Once she was steady, her breath catching in her throat, she looked down at Kodiak. He stood beside her, whining softly, his body pressed against her leg as if to support her. In his amber eyes, she saw no distance, no ghost of his former master, only an unwavering, present devotion. All her fear, all her apprehension of this powerful creature, melted away, replaced by a wave of overwhelming gratitude. She knelt slowly and wrapped her arms around his neck. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "Oh, thank you, Kodiak." This time, he did not pull away. He leaned into her embrace, letting out a soft sigh, finally accepting the touch of his new family. The long wait was over. He was home. The weeks that followed, Chloe's fall transformed the cabin. The silence was no longer heavy with grief but filled with a comfortable warmth. Kodiak had fully claimed his place in their small family. He was Chloe's constant shadow, often resting his heavy head on her swollen belly, as if listening to the secret flutterings of the life within. Liam would look up from his writing to see them, his wife and his grandfather's dog, and a profound sense of peace would settle over him. They were safe here. They were home. The warnings came over the crackle of the battery-powered radio, a voice from 100 miles away speaking of a storm system unlike any seen in decades. A blizzard of the century. They prepared as best they could, chopping extra wood until it was stacked high on the porch and checking their supplies of canned food and water. They felt secure in their fortress of logs and stone, ready to wait out the storm together. It arrived not with a gentle dusting, but with a sudden, violent roar. The world outside their windows vanished into a churning vortex of white. The wind shrieked like a living thing, clawing at the cabin and piling snow in massive drifts against the doors. Within hours, the power line snapped, plunging them into a flickering world lit only by oil lamps and the hungry glow of the wood stove. The satellite phone was useless, its signal lost in the atmospheric chaos. They were utterly and completely isolated. That night, as the storm raged its fiercest, the invisible enemy crept in. The relentless wind, howling down the chimney, shifted something in the flue. A blockage formed, silent and deadly. Instead of venting up into the storm, the colorless, odorless poison of the fire began to bleed back into the tightly sealed cabin. Liam woke to a pounding headache. The air felt thick, heavy, and his thoughts were sluggish, coated in a strange fog. He felt a wave of nausea and confusion. Beside him, Chloe was unnervingly still. "Chloe?" he mumbled, his voice hoarse. No answer. From the floor, Kodiak was whining, a high, panicked sound as he pawed frantically at the bedroom door. Stumbling out of bed, Liam's legs felt like lead. He saw Chloe, her face serene, her skin a pale, waxy white in the dim lamplight. A terrible, cold dread washed over him. He pressed his trembling fingers to her neck, searching for the familiar, steady rhythm of her pulse. There was nothing. He checked her wrist. Still nothing. He laid his ear against her chest, listening, praying for the faintest whisper of breath. Only silence. A deep, profound, absolute silence. In his oxygen-starved mind, a single, horrifying truth crystallized. She was gone. His Chloe and their unborn child had been stolen from him in the night. A guttural sob tore from his throat, a sound of pure animal anguish. The grief was a physical force, so immense it threatened to shatter him. He couldn't think. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't leave her here, in this room that had suddenly become a tomb. Driven by a desperate, irrational instinct, he wrapped her body in the thickest wool blankets. He had to get her out. He had to preserve her, somehow, away from the suffocating warmth of the cabin. He opened the door and was blasted by the freezing wind. Half carrying, half dragging her weight, he fought his way through the deepening snow to the small, unheated storage shed, a place for tools and firewood. He laid her down gently on a pile of old canvases, his body shaking with sobs. He latched the heavy wooden door, his mind a complete blank. The moment the latch clicked shut, Kodiak, who had followed him through the storm, reacted with primal violence. He launched himself at the shed door, his powerful body slamming against the wood. He clawed at the planks, splinters flying, his paws raw and bleeding in seconds. A ferocious, desperate barking erupted from him, a sound that cut through the howl of the blizzard. It wasn't a bark of anger, but of frantic, pleading denial. Liam, his face a mask of tears and frozen despair, grabbed Kodiak's collar. "Stop it!" he screamed, his voice breaking. "She's gone, boy! Leave her be, she's gone!" But Kodiak fought against him with a strength Liam had never imagined, his entire being focused on that door. He was a force of pure, unwavering loyalty, refusing to accept the white death that had claimed his home, refusing to abandon the one he had sworn to protect. For hours, the struggle against the storm was a struggle against the dog. Liam's pleas and commands were useless, swallowed by the wind and by Kodiak's relentless focus. The dog's paws were raw, leaving bloody prints in the snow, yet he continued to dig and claw at the shed door. His barks grew hoarse, turning into ragged, desperate coughs, but they never ceased. Liam, exhausted and hollowed out by grief, eventually collapsed into the snow, his energy spent. He could only watch as the German shepherd, a creature of pure, unyielding will, refused to surrender to despair. As the storm's fury began to wane, a strange quiet settled in Liam's mind. He watched Kodiak, whose frantic energy had not diminished, and a sliver of doubt pierced his grief. This was not the random panic of a dumb animal. This was the same focused intensity Kodiak had shown with the moose, the same vigilance he kept outside their bedroom door. It was a conscious, intelligent insistence. A gut feeling, a flicker of his grandfather's wilderness sense, told him to listen. He looked into Kodiak's eyes and saw not madness, but a desperate, urgent truth that screamed louder than the wind. He stumbled to his feet and lurched toward the shed. His frozen fingers fumbled with the latch before it finally gave way. The door swung open. Kodiak shot past him without a moment's hesitation. He went straight to Chloe's side, nudging her blanket-wrapped form, and then began to lick her limp, pale hand with a desperate tenderness. Liam stood frozen in the doorway, watching, his heart a dead weight in his chest, and then he saw it. In the frigid air of the shed, a tiny, almost imperceptible cloud of white mist escaped from Chloe's lips. It vanished as quickly as it appeared, a breath. Liam fell to his knees. The world tilted, the sound of the wind fading to a dull roar in his ears. He crawled to her side, pressing his ear close to her mouth. He felt it then, a whisper of air, impossibly faint, impossibly slow, but undeniably there. She was alive. A tidal wave of emotion, so powerful it almost knocked him unconscious, crashed over him. Hope, fierce and terrifying, flooded the empty spaces where grief had been. He worked with frantic purpose, bringing every blanket from the house, piling them on top of her. He raced back inside, his mind finally clear, and tried the satellite phone again. As the blizzard receded, a single bar of service appeared. His call was a broken, sobbing plea to a 911 operator, his words tumbling over one another. And then came the agonizing wait, with Liam talking to Chloe, telling her to hold on, while Kodiak lay pressed against her, a living furnace sharing his warmth. The drone of a snowmobile was the most beautiful sound Liam had ever heard. The rescue team was efficient, their movements sure and professional, as they loaded Chloe onto a sled. At the hospital, the world became a blur of bright lights and quiet, urgent voices. Hours later, a doctor, the same Dr. Evans who had cared for his grandfather, came to him. Chloe was alive. The baby was stable. It was, the doctor explained, a miracle of physiology. The profound hypothermia had slowed her body's functions to a near-death state, a form of suspended animation that had protected her brain from the lethal lack of oxygen caused by the carbon monoxide. The cold that should have killed her had, paradoxically, been her salvation. A week later, they drove home. The mountains were pristine, draped in a thick blanket of new snow, sparkling under a brilliant blue sky. In the back seat, a newborn baby, their son, slept peacefully in his carrier. They had named him Arthur. As they pulled up to the cabin, Kodiak was waiting on the porch. His paws were bandaged, but he stood tall, his tail giving a slow, tentative wag. Chloe got out of the car first. She walked straight to him and sank to her knees, burying her face in his thick fur. Her quiet sobs were not of sorrow, but of a gratitude so profound it had no words. Kodiak licked her cheek, a gesture of welcome, of a duty fulfilled. Liam came and stood beside them, placing his hand on the dog's head. The three of them stayed there for a long moment, a family made whole again by the hero who had refused to listen to reason, who had instead listened to his heart. Sometimes, the greatest truths are not spoken in words, but in a devotion that refuses to let go, even when all hope seems lost. Kodiak's story is a powerful reminder that the bond we share with animals is a sacred trust, a silent promise of loyalty that can lead to the most profound miracles. It's a love that listens to the heart, not to the logic of despair. If tales of such unwavering courage and affection resonate with you, we invite you to become a part of our storytelling family by subscribing, ensuring you never miss a future chapter from our collection.